Now this story starts off when I see this thing for sale over on the Yahoo auctions in Japan. Now at the time the photo that accompanied the auction was a blurry picture taken with a potato camera. It wasn't this one here. And the information below the description, all it said was it powers on. That's literally all I had to go on. A photo and it powers on. And yet my interest was piqued because looking at that photo it seemed like it might tie into one of my earlier videos. So the only way to find out was to order it and get it shipped over here. And that's exactly what I did, and let's have a look at it. So here it is, it's the Crown A800. It's got that nice 1970s hi-fi aesthetic that I very much appreciate, with a wooden case and a brushed metal fascia. There are a total of 5 slots up the left-hand side, and clearly those take music cartridges of some kind. We've got various self-explanatory controls on here, including tone and volume, as well as some less familiar features like a slot that's labelled CM, and a rotary control to adjust the CM between 5, 10 or 20. There's also a 1/4-inch mic input and a record button, as well as various pots to adjust the levels. Getting round to the back panel, things are quite normal on here. There are some speaker connectors though, so that means it incorporates a built-in amplifier, and then there's an auxiliary input and a line output. So overall, an intriguing looking device. You can see why I picked it up. It's similar to some 8-track changers, but it's more sophisticated, and it's clearly not an 8-track player. Now, to me, when I saw the picture of this, the first thought that jumped into my head was that this was a Hi-pac player. Now, sure enough, when I unpacked it, I tried it with a Hi-pac cartridge, and it fit perfectly. So then I went ahead and plugged it in, attached a powered speaker to the back, just the one speaker, because for some reason this device only has a mono output, despite Hi-pac being a stereo format. But sure enough, it played the cartridge, and the heads lined up perfectly with the tracks on the tape, so this was definitely made to play Hi-pac carts. Now, if you haven't heard of Hi-pac before, don't be surprised. Very few people have. In fact, it's something that never officially made its way out of Japan as far as music players go, and it was only when I made a video about it a few years ago that was the first English language video about the format on YouTube, and then following that there's been a Wikipedia article created. So you've got more chance of finding out about it now, but I'll put a link to that video at the top of the screen. But just to summarise what it was about in a nutshell, well, we have to go back to the early 1970s and the car stereo market. It was really starting to take off at this point, and in the US it was all about the 8-track cartridge. Now the 8-track was a US format. It came from Bill Lear of Learjet, and really it's a kind of slight upgrade of the 4-track cartridge, which was from Earl Madman Muntz. And then the 4-track cartridge was really the NAB cart, which was really the Echo-Matic. But it all goes back in the US. So US format, and they tended to fit it as standard to US vehicles, or as an optional extra. I think you could have got a cassette player if you'd really wanted in some vehicles. I think Volkswagen might have offered that, but generally, if you had a car device that played music from tape in the US in the early 1970s, you'd have an 8-track cartridge player. Meanwhile, over in Europe, things were starting to take off there, and it was all about the cassette, because of course the cassette was a European format, and with the help of Japanese manufacturers like Sony, and later you get Matsushita joining up with a Pioneer, JVC, Technics brands. There were quite a few people, and Grundig and people eventually signed on to this. So over in Europe and even in Japan, this was the one that was taking off in the early 1970s. However, there were some other companies in Japan that hadn't really signed up to the cassette at that point. And indeed, of course, there were Japanese companies that were also doing 8-track cartridges, but they wanted their own Japanese format. We've got the US format, we've got the European format, and there were some companies that wanted to create a Japanese format. But yeah, they came up with Hi-pac. Now, Hi-pac is a very neat little cartridge system, and it's designed really as a cross between compact cassette and 8-track. The benefit for 8-track was that it was a very simple system, both to manufacture for a car stereo, but also to operate. You just put your cartridge in, it played its way through all the 4 programs on a cart, and then went back to the beginning again. Just an endless loop tape with an album on it. Now, there were plenty of disadvantages, but that was the main selling point. Very simple for a car person. You don't need to go messing around pressing loads of buttons and things. Now, the compact cassette Relatively simple, but we tend to remember it more perhaps as it was in the 80s and 90s when you had your auto-reverse devices in vehicles. In the early 1970s, that technology hadn't been developed yet in a small enough format for a car stereo. You might have seen some videos I've done about devices that were able to play both sides of a tape, but they were very large devices for the home, and they used quite elaborate methods to be able to play both sides. So in a car stereo, you'd play side A, you'd take it out, you'd play side B. Not a massive hardship, but still a little bit more complicated than playing an 8-track cartridge. So the Hi-pac cartridge uses the same size tape, same width of tape as in the compact cassette, runs it at the same speed, but it's in an endless loop just like the 8-track, and therefore it's able to play through the whole cartridge. And there are 2 programs on here, and it can play the whole thing, program 1 and then program 2 and then back to the beginning again, just like an 8-track. So a car stereo device for this would just need one button on it to enable you to manually select the tracks, and again to play, you put it in the machine, to stop, you take it out. So that was the idea behind Hi-pac, and of course also the fact is they just wanted to have a bit of a format war, which didn't end up coming off, and everyone ended up using the cassette in the end. Now, when Hi-pac was launched in 1971, it was as a compact car stereo. There were plans to make all sorts of Hi-pac compatible devices down the line, but only once the car stereos had tested the water and established that there was an interest for this new compact tape format. I thought that because it was so unsuccessful, all they'd ever managed to do was make these car stereo type devices. Now you can see this one's inside a case, and the idea behind this is we've got a speaker in the front and the back, we can plug it into a mains power supply, and they've kind of converted these car stereos into some kind of a boombox or proto boombox. This is a pioneer device. And I had the theory at the time that because the Hi-pac was such an unmitigated failure, there must have been a warehouse somewhere full of these car stereo devices that nobody wanted. So they went and stuck them inside these boxes and then perhaps sold them off with a bundle of the Hi-pac cartridges, which also wouldn't have sold very well either. So I thought I'd only ever be able to see a Hi-pac player in a device like this, or perhaps that on its own as a loose component, but I didn't think they'd ever got any further than doing these, until now. Now, there are a couple of intriguing things about this device, though, that seem to indicate that it was never sold as a normal consumer-level Hi-pac player. For one thing, the word Hi-pac just isn't printed on it anywhere. But next, it's got a record feature. Now, in those press articles, they mentioned that there were no Hi-pac recorders at launch, and those would only follow once the product had become more established. And then we've got the fact that this otherwise sophisticated device is only capable of playing back the stereo Hi-pac format in mono. And on top of that, what's that CM slot for? Now, when I bought this, it was listed under the Karaoke category on the auction site, so I thought initially perhaps the idea could be that you'd choose a song, play the cartridge, sing along to it, and then record it so you could keep a copy of your performance. Fortunately, though, I don't need to spend any more time trying to guess how this worked because my device was supplied with a user manual. It's very handy that I had this because it took quite a bit of Google Translate skills to look through here and find out exactly what everything did, but now I understand what this particular machine's for. It isn't for the home, and it's also nothing to do with karaoke. In fact, it's a background music machine. And the way that this works is we've got our 4 cartridge slots at the bottom here, so we fill those up with Hi-pac cartridges. No doubt these would be special ones, not the ones I've got here, but ones that would be leased out to people who had this machine, like other background music services. But you fill your cartridges up at the bottom full of background music, and the machine will just play those through from the top cartridge to the bottom one, loop back round, go back to the top again. But we've also got one extra slot at the top here that's labelled CM. You put your blank cartridge in here, yes, a blank Hi-pac cartridge, which I don't have, but you put your blank cartridge in the top here, plug your microphone in the front, and you're able to record customer announcements on that cartridge, and then you set how often you want those to be broadcast each hour, and then every now and then while the music's playing the announcement comes over the top, and it could say something like, there's a discount today on corduroy flares, you'll find them in our menswear department on floor 3. So there you go, yeah, that's what this is. It's a background music machine. Let's take a closer look at it. I can see why they used HiPac for a background music machine, because it's an endless loop cartridge system, so it'll just continuously play, and each cartridge has 2 programs on it, and the machine will play through those automatically one after the other, and then once it's played through one cartridge it goes looking for the next one to play. I'm not sure the maximum possible playtime of a single cartridge, but I've got carts with 10 songs on them. I'm sure you could fit more than that. And then there's 4 carts to play through before it repeats, so I suspect that if this was in a shop you probably wouldn't hear the same song twice in a day. Now, when compared against my HiPac car stereo, the background music machine does move between the tracks in a different way. You can see here in the car stereo, the 2-track stereo playback head physically moves between the tracks. Whereas if we take a look inside the changer, the playback heads in there, they're fixed in place, and as I skip through the 8 programs, 2 per cart, you'll see the heads don't move at all. Instead, this device uses tape heads that contain 2 mono pickups on each, and electronically switches between them to select the 2 programs. Of course, it doesn't need stereo playback capability, with it being a background music player. The audio is just piped off to various individual speakers spread around a location. So on the back, we just have that mono line out next to the mono auxiliary input. Now, if you're wondering how these endless loop carts know when to jump down to the next program, well, that's something that HiPac borrowed from 8-track. I'll just take this jacket off because it's not required, and if we look at the back we'll see this is 4 programs on here rather than the 2 on HiPac, but it's the same idea. Every time the tape has done a complete loop it gets to a metal foil splice, and that completes a circuit on a sensor inside the machine which jumps the head down to the next program. You can see the 2 metal connectors inside this 8-track machine which get bridged by that piece of foil. So here's the HiPac version. The tape is half as wide, runs half as fast as the 8-track, but it's the same story. The metal foil completes a circuit and triggers the player to select the next track. Oh, and thanks to those instructions I now understand how that CM slot works. So that's the recording slot. It takes a special blank HiPac cartridge, and I'd imagine that would have been quite a short loop of tape. Once you've recorded your announcement on it, the control to its right then lets you select how often you want that to be played out every hour. So the minimum number of times would be 5, the maximum 20 times an hour, so that would have been once every 3 minutes. Now, you might have heard there that it's running slow. In fact, it'll be running about 20% slower than it should do, and the reason for that isn't down to a fault in the machine. No, it's down to a decision that was made in 1896. I'd better explain a little bit more. So, over in Japan, we're dealing with the electrification of the country around about this time. So 1895, Tokyo buy an electricity generator from AEG. AEG are a German company. The generators they make in Germany run on 50 hertz. So you've got 50 hertz AC coming out of this generator. So that's what Tokyo got. They're on the eastern side of Japan. Meanwhile, well, a year and a half or so later, Osaka, over on the western side, they buy a generator to do the same thing, electrify the area. But this one they buy from GE in the US, and being from the US, they're making generators that provide 60 hertz electricity. And then the grid's built out from there. So you end up with these split hertz. Towards the eastern side, you've got 50 hertz, same as in the UK. On the western side, you've got 60 hertz, same as in the US. And therefore, over time, it's become a bit of an issue. It didn't matter too much back then when they were putting them in. I mean, you were just putting your light bulbs on, or maybe electric fire or something, boiling a kettle or whatever. But by the time you get into the electronic era and you're dealing with motors and speed of hertz and frequencies and all that, it starts to become a bit of a problem. So electronics manufacturers in Japan generally make their products that are compatible with both systems, 50 and 60 hertz, with a slash between them on the back, because after all, you don't want to make a piece of equipment that you can only sell in part of the country. So generally they make devices that are universal, that will fit both sides. And this device is designed to be on the 60 hertz side of Japan, on the western side of Japan. Unfortunately, here in the UK, I'm 50 hertz, and that's why it's running slow. So let's see if we can resolve that issue. Now, I had my suspicions that a speed alteration might be possible because this had a 60Hz sticker on it, but it also had a 50/60Hz rating on the power label. Now, that's the same system as was on the flip clock cassette deck that I repaired a while ago, although that time that was a 50Hz sticker on the back, but opening it up revealed a lever which could be moved to adjust the gearing on the flip clock to ensure that it maintained the correct time. And more recently, I also came across a speed adjustment option inside the Philips ski slope changer. That one included a pulley wheel, which could be swapped out with the one that was on the motor of a different diameter if the machine was going to be used in a 60Hz zone. So it seemed likely that there should be some kind of similar internal speed adjustment in this device. I just needed to find it. Wow, now this is a piece of equipment. It doesn't look that exciting on the outside, but when you have a look inside here, look at this. These are all cards with an edge connector on the bottom there. So there's 4 of those. And at the back here, that seems to be more to do with the power. And then, of course, we'll have like amplification boards and things. And the idea is that if one of these goes faulty, you just take it out of the edge connector there at the bottom and slot a new one in. So you don't have to replace your whole piece of equipment every time something goes faulty, or worse still, perhaps send it off, get it repaired somewhere else. So an engineer could turn up to your place. Of course, this is the background music machine, you don't want it to go out of order, heaven forbid. So the guy would turn up with some boards and he'd just take one out and swap a new one in, as easy as that, and then of course take that back to the workshop and see what was wrong with it. So yeah, very squeaky, but I can't find a 50/60Hz switch. Here's me thinking I was all clever, and I haven't spotted it yet. Let's have a look around. Now, given the swappable nature of these boards, perhaps this is a device that you do swap a component out when you sell it in the 60Hz zone compared to the 50Hz. So unfortunately, I've got the wrong one, unless I can find some way to switch it, because I can imagine you just pull it out there, swap it in with another one, put a 50Hz sticker on the back. It could be as easy as that if you had that component. Let's just have a look. Take the bottom off, see if we can find anything else in here. There's a speaker in the bottom there. I had no idea there was a speaker in this. I don't know if you can see that there. Monitor speaker. There's a little pot you can adjust there. Once I put it all back together again, we'll have a play around with that. Okay, now we've got a load of fuses here, but above there we've got a capacitor. And above the capacitor it says for a 50Hz system use a 1 microfarad capacitor, or for a 60Hz use a 0.6 microfarad. Now, does that mean if I swap this 0.6 microfarad for a 1 microfarad capacitor, this thing will run at the right speed? Or is it just that I'm supposed to use the right capacitor for the right kind of transformer? I don't know the answer to that. Now you can see that this has got damp at some point over the years, and it's collected down at the bottom here, kind of humidity or something, but it's caused a bit of rust there, and also on the inside of here. But fortunately it wasn't sufficient to kill the machine off, so that's a positive. Also, the belt in here is pretty good actually, nice and springy, and there's the motor. So of course this is moving the flywheel around up here, and this is a heavy flywheel, so once this thing gets up and running, that should eliminate any wow and flutter. Now of course you heard it on the audio, it does sound quite wobbly, and that will probably be a combination of the age of the tapes, the fact they haven't moved very much over the years, and also the motor might have worn bearings in it, maybe it needs some lubrication as well. But it won't be down to the belt in this one, because the belt is doing its job, it's moving that flywheel at the top, and I don't see any problem there at all. Okay, so I'm going to leave this for the moment. At least I know that this is here now, and it's easy enough for me just to take the bottom off and replace this, if indeed that will change the speed. I don't know enough about electronics to know whether or not changing a capacitor can alter the speed of playback of a device like this. However, I know there's lots of very knowledgeable people who watch these videos and will comment and tell me whether or not replacing this capacitor will adjust the speed. And then based on what I read, we might come back to this in the future, take the bottom off, replace the cap, and see if that does the job. Okay, I'll just mention I've had a good look around in here, just in case there's anything else that has a 50/60Hz mentioned on it, and there's nothing that I can see. Also, I can't find any date codes on anything. the motor doesn't have one on it, and I can't spot anything else in here. There's no silicon chips, of course. This is purely old style electronics, all resistors and capacitors and relays and things, but no integrated circuits. So I really have no idea what year this thing was put together. Now this is an interesting thing. I wonder if you can just take the lid off that. Let's just have a look. So this is going to be the mechanism that determines which cartridge is being played and provides power to the appropriate one. Yeah, so if I press play on here, you'll be able to see this thing starts to move around. Yes, that's really the heart of the whole changer mechanism. That's the start point there, and then as it works around, it activates or deactivates the individual cartridges. So our continuous ring there around the middle would be providing power, and then also we've got these individual gold dots here that look like little eyes, and if you count those, there's 20 that go around that ring, and that is the same as the number of times it will play an announcement in an hour. Anyway, just a very interesting little way of doing things there without any kind of microprocessor control. Now looking at the back here, it appears that the cartridge players are also attached to edge connectors. So if I can get the front of this off, we should be able to slide one out. Let's see if we can do that. Right, so to get behind this, we've got a couple of screws at the top and on the bottom, and then of course we've got the knobs that just need to be pulled off towards the front. So if we just get those removed first of all. Don't want to bend anything. Right. Alright, let's see what we can see. Okay, I suspect to be able to get one of these out, I'd need to take this bracket off here. It looks like that's holding them in. All these screws are a little bit rusted in place. So it feels like this whole thing's been somewhere a little bit sort of humid, salty perhaps even. Maybe it was a background music system on a boat. Right, so that's that off. There we go. So that's your tape mechanism. Very simple, isn't it? Look at that. Let's just move it around a bit so we can see things a bit clearer. Just look how elegant that is. That's a cartridge player. I mean, how simple is that? Edge connector on the back here. We've got our playhead there, which is fixed in position, but there are 2 tracks on it, and when this connector gets bridged, it will electronically tell it to play the second track, and of course, once the second track's been played, if that gets bridged again, it'll jump it down to the next mechanism that will start on the first track. We've got our micro switch here, which tells the device that there's a cartridge in place, and then these are just 2 spring-loaded arms that hold the cartridge in, just to stop it sliding out, and you can see on the side of the cartridge here we've got our little indents there, and if we just slide this in, you'll be able to see the arms push out to start with, and then if I can get the cartridge in, and then we'll just see them click into position. There we go. So just look at that a little bit closer there. We've got our arms in position, so that it's holding it, but not so tight that you can't remove the cartridge. So how neat a design is that? I mean, that's really very ingenious, very clever, very simple. Now let's just take the cartridge out of here because I want to show you something. So the design of a Hi-pac cartridge is pretty much the same as the way an 8-track works, although of course it's a miniature version, but we've got the same system here. We've got a spool of tape in here. The tape comes off the centre of the spool, travels around here, goes across the front of the cartridge, and then back onto the spool again. Now whilst it travels across the front, it goes over these 2 pressure pads here, and over this pinch roller at the end. That's a rubber pinch roller, so all you need to be able to drag the tape through, of course there's no sprocket holes or anything on this, just like an 8-track it has a capstan which engages against this wheel here and spins around, and that's what pulls the tape around inside the cartridge. So inside here this can be very simple because all you need is one capstan for the whole machine to drive all the different mechanisms. If we just put our cartridge in this way up so you can see, just look for the wheel appearing through this hole here, and there it is. So inside the machine we've got one long bar which engages with the appropriate tape at the appropriate time and starts that one spinning. So let's just have a look where this came from, see if we can spot that. So I think you can see the capstan there on the right hand side. It's travelling all the way down past all the mechanisms. But the next question might be, how does it just select one to play? Why isn't it playing all of them at the same time? Well, that's down to a little metal finger just next to it. Now, if a cartridge is being played, that finger retracts and goes towards the back. I think that's the position it's in at the moment here. But if a cartridge isn't currently being played, it pokes further forward, and I'll show you how that interacts with the cartridge. So here's the hole on the cartridge that metal finger pokes into, and let's just see what happens when we poke something in here. Have a look at the pinch roller. Notice how it moves back inside the cartridge. So you can picture all the cartridges that aren't currently being played have their pinch rollers in that position, and therefore the tape isn't getting pulled through. But as soon as you want to play a cartridge, you pull the finger backwards, the pinch roller pops up, and the tape gets pulled through. It's a very simple system, but it shows that right from the beginning, when they were designing the Hi-pac cartridge, they must have been thinking about this, because with most cartridge systems, usually you just put the cartridge in and it plays, you take the cartridge out and it stops. Or in the case of a car, you can leave the cartridge in but disconnect the power and it'll stop. But with this one, they were thinking of another situation where you want to leave a cartridge in, but you want it to stop playing. So they came up with this little solution here. Again, very ingenious, and all a bit of a waste of time because nobody bought into this system, or hardly anyone did. Bit of a shame, just shows you all the work that went into it, and hardly anyone's ever noticed this. Now, this video has taken longer to make than you might imagine. You see, I picked this machine up a couple of years ago now, and when it arrived, got it out of the box, put the Hi-pac cartridge in, found that it played it. Didn't notice at the time that it was playing at the wrong speed though, but I was just happy to see that this thing worked. So then I went and put it on a shelf, and I thought, well, there's not much point making a video about a cartridge changer without having some more cartridges to put in it. So I kept searching for more Hi-pac cartridges, and these things are incredibly rare. Now, the only machines that tended to show up every now and then were those car stereo ones in the boxes like I showed before, but usually without any cartridges, or occasionally they'd come with one of these audition tapes, or perhaps a couple of audition tapes like this. These seem to be some of the most common type of cartridges you'll find, and I'd imagine that these were bundled with the machine once you first got them, and I think most people never got beyond these. So yeah, I've seen those a few times, but haven't seen any other titles. And then eventually, after, I don't know, perhaps a year or more of searching every other day, finally on the Japanese auctions appeared some other titles, but unfortunately they went for a massive amount of money, hundreds and hundreds of pounds, because included in them was a John Lennon album, and of course there's a big collector's market for those. But other titles that were there were some Japanese ones, but I did manage to spot from the pictures there was a Creedence Clearwater Revival album in there as well. So there were some Western albums came out on the format in Japan. But yeah, so then I was waiting for ages for the next lot to turn up, and again a year or so later managed to finally see an auction for a big bundle of cartridges, and I put in a silly high bid, managed to win those, and then just a few weeks later another bundle of cartridges from a different seller entirely appeared, and I won those as well. And again, didn't really explain in the picture what I was getting, but I've now got a load, well, a considerable amount of Hi-pac cartridges, so let me just show them to you. So these are the ones that I managed to obtain. This is the spoils of 2 auctions, and unfortunately, looking through these, there's very little that would appeal. I've played a few of these, or tried to. A lot of them had the sponges falling off the ends. You have to be careful that those don't get stuck inside the machine. So I really need to go through them all and fix them up. Now, a couple of things to point out. These have got 4 tracks on. So this is like a single. This is a K-single with 2 tracks either side, or an EP, I should say. But very traditional music, most of it. A lot of very serious looking people, not really kind of pop so much. I mean, a bit poppy-fied, but certainly not the kind of thing that you'd find very entertaining nowadays. Very kind of traditional music by the looks of it. Now, these are from 2 different auctions, so maybe this is the area that this particular format was aimed at, a kind of very serious, traditional Japanese music people. But But yeah, so I haven't really gone through all these. Every one that I've played, I thought, well, I wouldn't want to listen to that again. But one day I need to sit down and go through all these and replace the pads on them. There's also a bit of an issue that a couple of them have broken at the splice as well. Now, whilst the music might not all necessarily be to my taste, I've got to say it's great to see this many HiPac cartridges all together in one place. And I think it's quite likely I've got the UK's largest HiPac collection. Now, I was just using this cartridge to test the machine out, and it ended up getting itself a little bit tangled, so I've had to open it up. Now, fortunately, after all these years, the glue on the labels has dried up, and they just tend to fall off, so you can get to the screw underneath. Just one screw to open them up, and then we can see what's in here. So let's just get a closer look. Now, I think what happened here is the splice started to come apart, it wrapped itself inside the machine, and that's the reason why it got jammed. But it's a quite easy thing to fix. What I need to do, though, is to tighten the tape back up again first. I can't just put it back inside the cartridge like this, there's too much slack. So I'll need to take it apart at the splice here, and then tighten the reel up and put it back together. Now, unfortunately, the only splicing kits I've got are for 1/4 inch tape. So with this 1/8 of an inch wide tape, I'm having to do a bit of improvisation to hold it in place. I just wanted to show you the braking mechanism, or the deactivation mechanism we saw before, where the metal pin goes through the front and pushes the pinch roller away from the capstan there. Notice that's on a spring at this end, which pushes it against the front, but also on this end of the arm here, as that is in its state like it is at the moment, that's holding that disc. You can't spin this around until it's just moved in a little bit, so it acts as both a brake and a deactivation mechanism. So a very light push on it means that this can move freely, nothing on it means that it's in a braking position, and full push on it means that the tape won't get pulled through. So I think that's a very clever little design. But let's put the top back on here. I wanted to try and figure out what was going on with this speaker, why it wasn't playing. I guessed that someone had adjusted the monitor speaker volume, so I turned that up, still nothing to hear. Press the monitor button, no, still nothing. So I was thinking, oh, maybe it's just broken. But if you move the cartridge into the top position up here, this is the one that you'd use for recording onto, and it's playing back in there now. And if I press the monitor button while it's in that position, you can hear the audio. And the idea behind this, of course, is these three are connected. We've got record, start and monitor. So the idea is that you'd record your announcement using the microphone on the front. You'd then maybe want to listen back to it before it goes out live to the public, so you'd have a listen here rather than over all the speakers in the store. And once you were happy with it, you'd then turn it on at this position for whatever interval you required. Now, just for completeness sake, I thought I should get a blank cartridge, pop it in the top here and record some announcements on it. Of course, I don't have any blank cartridges though. And that, funnily enough, is one of the things that HiPac is known for over here in the West. Not the pre-recorded music, but if anyone has heard the word HiPac with regard to music equipment, it tends to be that it's to do with something quite different. So these are the HiPac cartridges that are most familiar outside Japan, and that's because they were used inside a series of Japanese-made tape delay echo machines like this one here. And those became quite popular and were sold all over the world, and that's why people recognise HiPac for tape delay but not for anything else. Musicians are still seeking these devices sometimes, and I borrowed these pictures off a recent advert. I don't know if this one is still available. Just in case it is, here's the full listing. Just one word of warning though, finding old blank HiPac carts has now become almost impossible, so there's operations that have sprung up who are prepared to put new tape inside your old carts for a considerable fee. But if you've got a machine without any carts, you're pretty much stuffed. But with next to no chance of finding a blank cart myself, I needed to make one of my own. And it just so happens I have a duplicate cartridge here amongst all those that I bought, and this one is particularly worn. But you can see here the tape has snapped at that point there. So what I'll do, I'll open it up, I'll replace the pads, I'll take a load of tape out because we don't want to wait for like half an hour for the announcement to come round again, and we'll record over the top of it. The only issue is, you see this little notch on the corner here? According to the brochure, manual I should say, it says here there are two types of cartridge. There's the normal ones with a cutout, and then there's ones with like a little section on there. that are the ones that you record on. They look identical otherwise, but they just seem to be a bit perhaps raised up. So what I can do, I can just pop something on top of that. Maybe there's a sensor inside the machine that won't let you record unless there's something on there. Okay, so I seem to have created approximately 1 minute loop of tape, about a minute 5 or so. So if I press record there and turn the microphone on, I can now record an announcement. Okay, I'm just turning on the microphone there. I think I'm going to talk really loudly into this. I've probably got the wrong impedance of microphone, so excuse me if I'm shouting a little bit. Yeah, I never did get the announcement part to work properly. I was able to record onto a cartridge and I'm able to play it back. But the thing is, it will just keep playing back continuously if the cartridge is in position, irrespective of whatever position I put this control into. It never stops, it just goes on and on and on and over the top of the music. It doesn't fade the music in or out, any of that business. Now, I don't need to have an announcement device, so it's not important to me, but I've got a feeling that perhaps it's down to the fact that there was a special way to lay down the recording, the microphone that came with it. Maybe it would lay down a tone on the second track to say that that is the end of the recording. It's the only thing I can think of, because when you look in here, you can see that there is a 2-track head on the recording section, and yet you'd only ever be using one of the tracks. But then again, it does seem a little bit elaborate that this would have a tone system where the other ones would use metal foil. By the way, I did try it with a metal foil. I put some on here, but there is no sensor for that in there, so it didn't stop. It just carried on playing. So yeah, a bit of a mystery that, but still I was able to make a recording and play it back. It's just I couldn't never get it to stop playing. But what I have to do is record for about a minute. I've created a minute loop of tape, not deliberately. I've done a much shorter length than that, but I've got 1 minute worth of... Now, after playing around with this, I've got a lot more appreciation for HiPac as a format, the technology that went into it, the clever engineering. But that said, I'm glad cassette won out. I mean, this thing didn't really stand a chance, but in an alternate reality where this became the dominant format, I'd imagine most of my old cassettes I've got behind me there now would be unplayable, because just the few that I've got here, I've spent hours splicing them back together again, replacing the pads inside. They don't seem to hold up as well as cassettes. I've got to say, I don't have a load of early 1970s cassettes, though. I mean, these are from right at the beginning of the 70s, but still, these things seem prone to tangling up inside, catastrophic failure, pads falling off, splices coming apart, something I've never really experienced with cassette. But still, I'll have to go through them all, but it's going to take me forever because I'm going to have to replace all the pads and sort out all the splices and stuff. So perhaps a job for another day. Talking of which, if you know the answer to the question about the speed variance and whether or not replacing a capacitor would really adjust the speed in this player, let me know. Again, I don't have to deal with this anymore. I've got this player here which does a great job of playing the cartridges. This one perhaps is a little bit more wobbly in places anyway, but that might be down to the tapes themselves. So if I can't get this going at the right speed, it doesn't really matter. But it'd be nice to know. If you know for definite whether replacing a capacitor can adjust the speed, we'll come back and have a look at this again another day. But I've certainly learned a few things here playing around with HiPac. I hope you've enjoyed having a look at this as well. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.